when you're in the professional sports world, you're surrounded by the highest performers and highest achievers at their craft. And everybody thinks of the athlete. But if we're surrounded by these high performing top 0.1% in the world at what they do, you're surrounded by the best of the best. And that mindset, that commitment to excellence, the standards that people execute and leaders step into every day in that environment, it translates over to the front office. And so even though I was on the business side, we absorbed the energy and the practice and the process and the systems and the leadership principles of what separate the elite athletes from the rest of the pack.
Welcome to the Excellent International Leadership Podcast. Your host today works with the world's leading experts on international leadership, helping them find purpose and implement their vision. She's a master certified coach and facilitates a mastermind for CEOs of international companies. She's the author of 3 books and works with Nestle, Novartis, and even the United Nations. She's especially good at helping executives fast track to the C-suite. Welcome, Dr. Katrina Bruce.
We all want to perform better. But how does a lack of confidence affect your performance? And what can one do about it? Let's ask Paul Epstein. Welcome to the Excellent International Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Bruce, and today we have Paul Epstein. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Fired up to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background, because you're a former NFL and MBA executive. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how you became a leadership expert on confidence and building trust in cultures, being more courageous.
Absolutely. So like you said, I spent a decade and a half in the professional sports world, but I was not the player. I was the business executive. So rising from an entry to executive level, 3 NBA teams. So in the basketball side here in the US, and then I did some consulting work in an agency for some of the biggest brands that lands me in leadership roles for 2 different Super Bowls. And we broke some all-time revenue records there. And then most recently, I was with the San Francisco 49ers, heading up their sales and business development efforts, opening up billion-dollar stadiums, billion-dollar expectations, billion-dollar campaigns. And the beauty of that chapter, Katrina, is when you're in the professional sports world, you're surrounded by the highest performers and highest achievers at their craft. And everybody thinks of the athlete. But if we're surrounded by these high performing top 0.1% in the world at what they do. So even for our international audience in the US, we would call that soccer, but everybody else football. So for your your favorite football club, domestic and international, you're surrounded by the best of the best. And that mindset, that commitment to excellence, the standards that people execute and leaders step into every day in that environment, it translates over to the front office. And so even though I was on the business side, we absorbed the energy and the practice and the process and the systems and the leadership principles of what separate the elite athletes from the rest of the pack. And then frankly, Katrina, I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life in the sports world. I loved every single bit of that 15-year journey. But then in 2017, there was a leadership retreat that changed my life. Yeah, I went to a 2-day offsite. Team president of the 49ers, he took all of us offsite. And it was the first time that I had done some of the inner work. I figured out my why. I left that retreat understanding my values, but I didn't think of them as inspirational North Stars. I didn't think of them as words on a wall. I thought of them as drivers of how I needed to show up every day. So I obsessed over the coming weeks and months after this retreat. I started to connect these conceptual things and these words like why and values to my daily decisions and actions. And then through that process of self-discovery and personal transformation, I started to coach it to others as a passion project. I was still running revenue for the 49ers, but inside of the front office, I brought my team through the entire experience that I went through at the retreat. And then some buzz started to be created inside of the organization to the point where some of the football players came up to me. Then some of the coaches came up to me. Then HR, our human resources team, came up to me and says, we want you to coach this why to all of our onboarding employees.
So I want to have two examples. One is, what is the 1% that are driven and how it trickles down to you as an executive? Very concretely, how did that affect you? And then this retreat, how did it change you? And how did it change you? I know when you have your purpose, you're more motivated and everything, but could you give us more examples?
Of course. So on the first one, what separates the top 1% and how does it translate to leaders? Very simple. Standards over goals. What I took from the top 1% were they are standards driven more than they are goals driven. So in business, we obsess over goals and metrics and KPIs and numbers, but they're arbitrary, or you hit them or you don't, or you fall 5% short and then you hit it a day later and it's a failure. But it's not. But that's the mindset of goal driven. I'm not against goals. I just feel like they are outcomes. Like athletes don't focus solely on the end win. They focus on the daily principles, processes, systems, behaviors, which are standards. And standards, you can choose to step into those standards every day, and they're more meaningful to you. So that was a principle that I translated into my leadership practice and inspired my team around it. But I learned that from the sports and the athletes. Now, your second piece, how did the retreat change me in a concrete fashion? It made confidence a superpower. Before that retreat, my confidence was inconsistent at best. I had good days, I had bad days. I felt bullishly confident. The next day, I lacked it at the most critical forks in the road. But ever since that retreat and putting my why and values, especially my values more than my why, my values, when I started to connect those to my behaviors, my decisions, my actions, it built my confidence muscle, because essentially it builds a bridge from who you are to how you show up. And when those two things are synchronized and there's synergy between who you are and how you show up, that's how I modeled my leadership behaviors and frankly, my personal lifestyle every single day from that point forward. And that's why I coach and speak about confidence all over the world now. It was from those principles that I learned from that retreat.
Okay, so you're coming out of the retreat and you find that people come towards you because, in fact, your process helps them be even more confident and not just stay on standards, and how does that confidence affect the sportsman or the leader?
Well, frankly, confidence is our oxygen. Confidence is our fuel. I always say when I'm training folks on how to become the most exceptional leader possible, I say it is at the intersection of confidence and humility. People in the world, sports, business, and beyond, when you can master and in parallel, not one over the other, you are simultaneously elevating your confidence and your humility together, those people don't lose. Because too much of one is at the detriment of the other if they're not growing in synchronicity. You know, you give me somebody that is all humility and no confidence, well, they don't have followers because nobody feels like they are somebody worthy of following because they are just not inspiring the confidence from others. But then on the opposite end, too much confidence, no humility, it's all ego. And if we listen to them, it's just a culture of fear. It's a culture of boss. It's not a culture of authentic followership. So that's really where I've really been dancing ever since, is how do we simultaneously grow in parallel our confidence and our humility?
So what's the process?
Well, the process for one is I have a formula that is confidence equals values times action. The multiplication is how consistently you do it. And so when I'm coaching somebody to become the most confident version of themselves, we identify a core value. And then it's a very simple process. But remember, simple is not easy. And this is also, in my opinion, why a lot of New Year's resolutions don't work. We lack a process, we lack a system, and we lack the consistency and the dedication to do it long enough so that we can internalize it and it becomes muscle memory. So the journal is very simple. It is, you pick your value, and then for the week ahead, I will live my value of blank by blank. The first blank is a value. The second is an action that you connect to the value. A couple examples. Joy. I will live my value of joy by cooking my favorite meal. It doesn't need to be business related, but it reinforces that you are brought joy because you cook your favorite meal. Now let's raise the stakes a little bit. Let's say courage, core value of courage. I will live my value of courage by having that challenging conversation that I've been putting off. You're not having that conversation because Paul said. You're having that conversation because courage is a core value. And Katrina, when we can do this, what we have studied from the leadership sciences, habit formation happens in a 3 to 4 week time period. So if we can do this weekly journaling exercise and pass the threshold of habit formation, that is when transformation happens. So when I'm coaching, and I've done this for Olympian athletes, I've done this for professional athletes, I've done this for Fortune 50 CEOs and beyond, and it works every time if the process is sustained for at least that 3 to 4 week period. So for a new client, a new leader I'm working with, we do it for 30 days. 4 journaling sit downs, 2 minutes of sit down, less than 10 minutes in the course of a month. Transformation and confidence are on the other side. And that's how I coach confidence. That is step 1 of a very long journey.
Very interesting. If you could master one thing in your life, what would it be?
Decision making.
Why?
Because I think it's the root of the quality of our life.
Now, you've written a book called Better Decisions Faster, and it's hot out of the press. So tell us a little bit about the key message and why you think it's the most important.
Yeah, so for everybody listening in, if we could do an honest audit, an honest assessment, show me the quality of your past decisions, and I'll show you the quality of your life. The decisions you've made in business, in strategy, in career, parenting, relationships, your health. Good decisions lead to good quality life. Bad decisions lead to a bad quality life. It's pretty black and white. And nobody ever pushes back, Katrina, when I say do an honest audit and assessment. So when I realized that we all want a higher quality of life, but a lot of us lack a process or system to get there. So when I realized that essentially life is a game of decisions, and these decisions lead to actions, but the root of it all, the lowest common denominator, are decisions. So we're creating a movement and a rally around, well, if decision making is the key to having a high quality business, a high quality life, I want to make them better and I want to move faster.
But
especially in the
good can be
space.
different for different people. So how do you evaluate something that's qualitative like good?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're right. It's a very customized journey. But the process and the application that I've coached people through, and that frankly, I embody myself because I audited my own decisions, good and bad. I call it the head, heart, hands equation. So head is our mindset. Heart is our authenticity. Hands are our actions. The equation is head plus heart equals hands. In other words, when deciding whether to use our hands, whether to take action, there's 2 checkpoints. Head and heart. Head, do I think it's a good idea? Heart, do I feel it's a good idea? And just like when we're driving, we all know what to do at every corner of the road. We see a signal. Green is go, red is stop, yellow is assess. And that's exactly how the head, heart, hands equation works. When our head and our heart are on board, it is a green light to take action. When no head, no heart, that's a red light. We either don't do it or we stop doing it. And when either our head or our heart are on board, that's a yellow light. And so when I write a book like Better Decisions Faster, it's to fill our business and our life with more green lights. It's also to create the awareness necessary to stop running reds, because subconsciously we all run reds, but now we're creating a framework to be more aware. And then in a podcast, we're not going to be able to dive into too many of the depths of a yellow light, but you can imagine most of our tougher calls and tougher decisions lie in the yellow. So the most important payoff of the playbook, Better Decisions Faster, it's so we can all learn to conquer and navigate that messy middle of yellow.
Yes, and like the yellow, I'd imagine what you think you should do and what you want to do. Do you have other comments to make on that?
Yeah, I think with yellow lights, the big takeaway here is not all yellows are created equal. And here's what I mean. There's a drastic difference between your head being on board and your heart out versus the opposite when your heart is in and your head is out. One is very dangerous.
Which
One of
one?
them.
Which one?
Well, we've all experienced this far too many times when only our head is on board. And I'll give a little context and a real world example. But the reason is your heart isn't going to change day to day, week to week, month to month. You're not going to wake up in 30 days and your heart is going to feel drastically different about a job, about a person, about a career. It's just not going to happen. We're lying to ourselves. So if I know that this yellow light never has the potential of being a green because my heart is never going to go on board, then I'm losing the time in the process. I'm hanging out in this nasty yellow. Here's a real life example. So I used to lead mega sales enterprises, hundreds, if not thousands of folks. And we all know, whether I'm talking all leaders out there, we run big teams. And sometimes, whether sales or any other facet of business, sometimes we have these top performers, these high achievers, but sometimes they're not always so nice in the locker room, meaning in the sales team, sometimes they were a bit toxic in their energy, but they sold a lot of widgets, they generated a lot of revenue. So my head said, keep them because of the production. But my heart knew they weren't a keeper. And that yellow is more deadly than a red because fast forward 2, 3, 4, 5 years, now they've infected our entire environment. Our culture is toxic. We're losing good people because they see their leader is supporting this behavior. And now we have retention problems, engagement problems, recruiting problems. But the root cause is we hung on to too many yellow lights in a team and culture and leadership environment. And that yellow to me is more deadly than a red because at least the red, snap your fingers, it's done. But this yellow, it's more deadly because we lose the time. And that's a real world example that I think applies. We've all hung out in some yellow lights for far too long.
So, given your example, and of course, I coach brilliant jerks, as I call them affectionately, did you ever try to modify their abrasive behavior?
Of course. And I learned this lesson from consulting one of the top airlines here in the US. They've got 120,000 employees, 6,000 positional leaders. And I did workshops with all 6,000 over the course of multiple years. And I came into this thinking that all culture was top down and there was this halo culture and a macro culture. But this experience taught me something very different. Because when I would visit their headquarters to do these workshops, I would go in and floor 5, they were high-fiving, camaraderie, connection, bear hugs, the whole thing. And then I'd go up to floor 6 and it was, shh, watch out, boss is around the corner. So different floors of the building, different weather systems. And Katrina, it wasn't just the same airline on floor 5 and 6. They were the same department. The exact same department, different floor of the building, different weather system. And that taught me that culture is not top down. All culture is local. Within every culture, there is infinite microclimates down to the floor of the building, down to the individual. So when you and I, Katrina, myself, anybody listening in, or these toxic folks that you just brought up in your question, when we walk in a room or we hop on a Zoom meeting or whatever we do, there's 2 choices. We warm it up or we cool it off. The question is, are we aware of our own temperature? And so when you can be warm, the person to your left and right can be warm. That is a culture that scales. And I would talk about warming up rooms to these individuals that were these yellows. And over time, that's eventually how we would, as they say, manage up or out. But it was solely based on temperature. Because when I was solely basing it on an Excel spreadsheet, well, they kept selling more and more widgets. So you keep them. But then you realize the net negative, it's just not worth it. And now I call those the bad yellow lights.
I see. So, what else does your book cover? The one on better decisions faster.
For leaders, there's a tremendous opportunity because everyone listening to this, we've all suffered from decision fatigue, decision overwhelm, paralysis by analysis, and then we make the worst decision of them all, which is indecision. And what I've seen through my leadership work over the years, both personally and as far as coaching to others, indecision is the silent killer. And if we're not indecisive, a lot of leaders are decisive, but would they say that about every member of their fellow leadership team? Would they say that about the front lines of their organization? There is a massive lack of decisiveness around us. So even if we are we creating the right environments? Are we inviting people to show up with their own form of decisiveness, knowing that we're either going to succeed or we're going to learn, we're going to succeed or we grow, we succeed or we develop? Like what I've learned is so many people, they get frozen because they're too outcome driven. But if they're action driven, then they embrace imperfect action. They're not worried about the outcome. They're not worried about swinging the bat one single time and it's going to lead to a positive result. They know that they're either going to hit the ball or they're going to learn, why did I miss? And they're going to be better tomorrow. And it's this constant evolution of just continuing to learn, grow, adapt, evolve. And what the book of Better Decisions Faster really does for all of us too, it creates amazing conversations where now that we're all decisive, the key is we're not always going to agree. Sometimes there's conflict, sometimes there's a difference of opinion, and sometimes we're intentionally going to be challenged or disrupted. And what this book does, it creates a language through these green, yellow, and red lights where we can now have a healthy conversation. Okay, we're deciding which product to launch, which campaign to run, whatever it is. And okay, a percentage of us are going to feel green. Some are going to feel yellow. Maybe some do feel red, but at least now we have a healthy conversation, open face cards. Why are you a green? Why are you a yellow? Why? It's not personal. We're just essentially explaining this color versus whether I like the person or not. And now it's personal. It's not about that. And here's a big piece I want to impress on all leaders. The reason this works, and it's worked in my home, it's worked in my business, I've applied this everywhere. It's not just the color. It's the intensity of the color. So in other words, sometimes you'll have a mixed bag of greens and yellows when evaluating a decision with your fellow team. But it's not just the color. It's how strongly do you feel about the color. And the way I learned about this, even as a dad, my wife and I we landed in different colors about whether to have a second kid. She was a green, I was a yellow, and we explained it, and it was a very healthy conversation. Then we took a week or two apart and we came back, and happy to say we're expecting our second, so you know kind of where this goes. But the reason why I hopped over to her side was her green was very strong, very passionate. My yellow was, I'm an only child. I saw a lot of advantages. So I had a lot of logical reasons that one child was perfect, at least in my eyes, but she really wanted a second. And because she cared more about the decision, I went over to her side. And the same is possible in our business, where it's not just a color, but if somebody is passionately, if it is a marketing decision and your CMO is a strong green, even if other people are a yellow, perhaps we may want to go over to that side because they care, they're more invested, they have more conviction, they're going to be responsible and accountable for the execution and the follow through. And if it doesn't work, it is going to fall on their head. So regardless, we should pay attention to the intensity of the color, not just what color it is. And this book helps you unpack all of that.
And how does it help you overcome self-doubt, stress, and anxiety when you're making a big decision?
Absolutely. So going back to the head, heart, hands equation, I think we live in a world where we're all trying to make the smart decision, but sometimes when we reflect back, it's the heart decisions that help us overcome those things. But we ignore our heart. We bypass our heart for so many different things. And so because we're living on other people's terms, or we're so worried about what other people might think, or we're worried about a potential negative outcome or a consequence, we freeze. And when we freeze consistently and we don't even feel like this is the life plan and the business plan that we chose, then over time, the compounding effect is we become more stressed and we play smaller because we feel smaller. And so what this does, I think this is a very important insight, not only of the book, but of the head, heart, hands equation. I'm not suggesting that it's head or heart. I'm saying it's head plus heart. It's a head and heart. And so the reason that's important is a lot of us over-index to one or the other. Some of us are very logically driven. Some of us are very emotionally driven. I'm emotional, and I'm just going to make this up, Katrina, just for sake of this example. Let's say that you're heavier on the logic side. We all have nobody's 50-50. Everybody steers, their default setting is one way. But if I'm emotional, then this equation forces me to check in with my logic, even though that's not my natural setting. And if somebody is default setting logic, this forces them to tap into their emotions, into their hearts. And so what I have found is, especially for the latter, that often will ignore their heart, that's where a lot of our stress comes from. That's where we fear a lot of decisions. And also, we haven't had a process or a system on how to make decisions. So just having an equation like the head, heart, hands equation, that gives us more strength, more empowerment, more confidence, and all of those things help us make the best decision at the most critical forks in the road, because we believe in our process more.
We're coming into the end of our podcast. Where can people get a hold of you?
PaulEpsteinSpeaks.com is where you can find everything. Of course, the book is on Amazon, and on my website, Katrina, a beautiful gift that has helped inspire confidence all over the world. And I want to offer it to everybody listening in. It's a confidence quiz. And so on PaulEpsteinSpeaks.com, it's a 5-minute quiz. It's free. And you walk away understanding your confidence score of 1 to 100. And then on the back end, you get a resource on how you can not only build, but sustain unshakable confidence. And the beauty is you could share this out with your entire teams as well. It's all at PaulEpsteinSpeaks.com. So confidence quiz, that's my gift to your entire audience, because this is just an awesome conversation.
Thank you very, very much, Paul.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent International Leadership Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com and select podcasts. Join us each Thursday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your leadership to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burris's coaching programs and the International Leadership Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.